Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
So, did we just survive these regime change propaganda operation over Iran? Do we make it through, or is it just starting?
Yeah, you're saying, well, um, I'm sure they have more tricks up their sleeve. Yeah, the last I saw is that yeah, the protests had been, you can say, suppressed or died down, a combination of the two, and that there was a very, very large counter demonstration of supporters of, the government in Tehran. So, it appears for the time being that the government is getting the upper hand. Um, yeah, it's hard to understand what's going on. I've gone to different people, like, for example, Trita Parsi, who is an expert, an Iranian himself, not a supporter of the government, but not anti-Iranian, opposed to the attacks on Iran and so on and so forth. And generally, very well informed about Iran in general. And he just admitted he didn't know what was going on because there's really been the government hit the kill switch, and I think with not for nefarious reasons, but because they understood that it was being used. It was part of a plan to foment unrest and to topple the government, and so it was shut down, and that means that we just are getting very, very limited information. And some of it is, with AI and all the other tricks that exist now, it's really hard to know what really happened. But clearly there was there were violent demonstrations. They started off peacefully, and I think that they were organic. There was, again, in particular, the devaluation of the real and inflation. And then they spread, they grew, and then they became violent. And I think that that's maybe where we're seeing the hand of Mossad or the CIA. Again, a lot of people would think, oh, you're reaching for a conspiracy theory. You're just making excuses for them. But we look at the history of Iran. Look at the recent, the 12-day war and what preceded it. It's almost to be expected. It would be very strange. I would be very surprised if the Mossad and the CIA and other, external agents were not involved in exploiting these attacks. Some cases you may have secessionists. There are many different ethnic groups in Iran. It's a very, multi-ethnic country. So you have the Baluchis and the Kurds and so on and so forth. And they have their separatist movements. But the thing is, like, okay, yeah, maybe they were involved to some extent. But the thing is, they are supported by the CIA. The CIA sees them as, potential against weapons that they can use against the regime or the government, and they have been using them. And I think probably they used them in these protests. So I think the only question is like, to what extent, when we're looking at it, was it organic? What extent was it manufactured from abroad or supported from abroad? And we don't really know. Now, I think there probably were really reasons to be angry at the government. My understanding is that in dealing with budget shortfalls, they made the mistake, which the classic mistake of printing money to make up the shortfall. So you got this inflation, you got the devaluation of the real. That's a predictable result of that kind of economic action on the part of the government. So that was incompetence. That was sheer incompetence, if that report that I got was true. And I think it was true. It was by somebody who was really qualified to talk about it. So there were reasons to be angry. The problem is, like, every time there is a reason to be angry to demonstrate, then you have these people who do not have the interests of Iran at heart to move in and try to take advantage of it. And the government is forced to respond forcefully. Now, I'm not going to, probably in some cases they responded too forcefully. I don't know. I'm not there. We don't know. But anyway, that's where we are right now. And I've heard that, again, their armed forces have been on a high state of alert. They don't want a repeat of what happened in June of last year, where they were taken by surprise. They're expecting an attack. And then we've heard rumors from within the U.S. that Trump is instructing his generals, to prepare something. again, there's all this murky world, what's happening behind the scenes. But there's a real chance, Trump apparently is, he's mad about these demonstrations and he wants to punish Iran. This is sort of I think, again, this is not strategic or rational thinking. It's just emotional thinking. And that's what we see often in Trump. There was that report about dancing Maduro. We don't know to what, if that was true. But the thing is, we know Trump. It very well may have been true. Or I just heard this morning, just to give you another example, something somewhat different, is that he decided that, okay, Exxon will not be allowed to go into Venezuela because he didn't like the way that, the Exxon CEO talked at that press conference. Again, what is it? It's just personal. It's emotional. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah. Well, one thing that seems to be a bit different about this regime change operation is the messaging isn't as consistent because usually the style is to say that, oh, this is an organic thing. We're just here to liberate the people of Iran. But Israel itself has been quite open about it. The Jerusalem Post had a headline that says, Mossad spurs Iran protests as agents with demonstrators and Farsi messages. As protests grow across Iran, the Mossad posted unusual Farsi message urging demonstrators to act. So they're open about it. They admit in Jerusalem Post. Haaretz had an article that says the Israeli influence operation aiming to install Reza Pahlavi as Shah of Iran. So they're just saying it. And then we had Mike Pompeo as well with a tweet saying, right. to all those Mossad agents alongside the protesters.
Right.
So I think this is the problem. We're very open. Same thing with Venezuela now. It's like, oh, we're not here to liberate Venezuela, save them from evils of socialism.
Well, sometimes we talk.
Exactly. We do sometimes, and then we say the other thing. So it's like... It's like they've forgotten how the playbook works. You know?
Well, I think they've just lost their sense of caution. In that Haaretz article, I remember there were some comments like, you're not supposed to say this out loud. Actually, some other Israeli officials were annoyed by the fact that, again, you mentioned that that group that is supporting the Hasbara group that's supporting the Shah and trying to get him reinstated or whatever, create some sort of support for him within Iran. Yeah, they said, I understand why you do this, said this other Israeli official, but you don't say that out loud. So there is some concern even within Israel about this. And I'm sure, and I think we see the same thing in the U.S. Recently, who knows what statement he's made since then, but very recently, Trump made a statement, I think, in speaking to the New York Times, said, oh, no, it wasn't about the oil. I just kind of noticed the oil later. And I think it was an attempt to walk back because they did have their propaganda, scheme all worked out ahead of time. It's going to be about this and it's going to be about that, remember. And then, but Trump just doesn't, he tends to act impulsively, and he forgot about that and started talking openly about the oil. And I think you're finding a similar situation in Israel. I guess it's just a product of being sort of a hegemon for such a long time, is that you lose your sense of caution, the need to actually to cover up, your true intentions.
Well, I think Trump actually stating his true intentions with Venezuela might actually be better than going with the typical route of spreading liberal democracy. I think that ironically, maybe not ironically, but this actually resonates more with his base. Just like, I'm being open about it. We need oil and I'm going to take it. But the problem with Iran is that you're saying that you care about these protesters so much and you're just doing it because you have such a big heart and you don't want to see people die. Meanwhile, we just watch what Israel's doing. We watch tens of thousands of children get obliterated. And now you're saying that you care about these protesters and if don't you lay a finger on a hair of their head, or else we'll come in guns a-blazing. And meanwhile, over this weekend, we've had massive protests across the United States, but it's like they're trying to ignore it. And when they're talking about the protests, it's like, let's just talk about this protest on the other side of the country that we are openly admitting in press releases from Israel that this is an Israeli Mossad operation, that we are heavily involved in this. So it just doesn't work. Like, how can you send that message that we're just doing this because we just love freedom so much? No, we just got to go over there.
This double standard is not new. It's just become more blatant over time. And
but you can't use that playbook now because of what you've done in Gaza. You
Yeah.
know, as one thing,
Well,
and
among certain people, you can. You know, I'm struck by it again. Like reading these Haaretz articles. You know, these again are supposed to be the bleeding heart Israelis, and they're talking about they're concerned for the Iranian people, and I just come on, give me a break. You know, this is you know that your government is not concerned about the Iranian people or any other people other than yourselves. But it does actually seem to work to some extent. But I think the population upon which this kind of propaganda is effective is shrinking, you know, with every day. It still works with some people. But yeah, the rest of the world looks at it and says, yeah, this is too obvious. Give me a break.
Right. But the thing is that I think that the media, the people that are really kind of in control, a lot of it coming from Israel, they realize that they don't need to convince the masses. They just need to convince Trump. And so when I'm watching all these news clips, turn on Fox News, they're all praising Trump, saying like, "This is it, Trump. You're the peacemaker. You got to go in. This is your time to shine." And we know Trump, that he eats that stuff up. And you were just saying earlier how
right.
Yeah, just how, he sees one video of Maduro dancing and that could change his opinion. So really, they just realize they can be brazen. All they have to work on is the flattery with Trump. And I saw it all over the news on all different channels, whether it's just pundits or they're putting Reza, how do you pronounce his last name?
Pahlavi, or I think I'm not,
yeah, and they're just all sucking up to Trump, just how great you are, Trump, that you're doing this, and this is your time to create your legacy, and this is it, this is it. And let's see, we'll just have to find out if it worked, or if his mind is changing. Unfortunately, everything just seems to depend on how Trump's feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's a very good point. And probably that may be right, that's the main focus of so much of this. They know that he actually gets a lot of his information from TV and while ignoring his intelligence briefs. That's been reported several times. And so you say this is a way to reach him. We can work him on with the intelligence briefs because we have this very, maybe not exactly control, but, almost one of our guys is running the CIA. John Ratcliffe, somebody who's, an avowed Zionist, and he was just funneling Mossad intelligence to Trump prior to the 12-day war. So they got that, but they also know that he is very concerned about, what he sees on TV. And sometimes it seems like that's the reality. For him, that is reality. So there are two ways to get him, and they're probably working on both.
Right. Well, let me show you kind of what he's seeing on TV, just so we get an idea of maybe the headspace that Trump is occupying, because we know that a lot of his worldview is shaped by Fox News. So I'll play this clip.
That there are two things that are completely different than the previous demonstrations. One is that the regime is at its weakest point in 45 years. Politically, they can't meet the social and political and economic aspirations of the people. Economically, they're in the tank, to be sure, and with no prospect of recovering. And militarily, they just lost a war. They've lost their platform in Syria. Their proxies are, by and large, decapitated and almost eliminated, to be sure. And the result of all of that is they are in a fundamentally weak position. And it's serious in terms of the regime. Mm-hmm. And when you have that, it also breeds discontent and breaks down trust and unity because people begin to fear about their own survival. The second thing that's completely different, Brett, and that is President Trump. He is in power, and he uses force to accomplish significant objectives, but uses limited force. And he has told them, no uncertain terms, if you kill these people, you're going to answer to me, paraphrasing his words. They've killed 48. They've imprisoned about 2,000. We know when they put them behind the walls, what do they do to them? They torture them, they beat them, and they hang them. And they do that out of public view for all the obvious reasons. If I was in the Iranian regime, I would take President Trump dead serious here.
Yeah, I think you're right. And probably Trump watched that and saying, this is also,
just a microcosm, I want to say, like I watched a fair amount of news clips. There's so many that are just like this. So anytime Trump turned on the news, it doesn't seem to be about the protests here in the United States. It's all about Iran. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, no, that's true. But again, that's always been true. People have commented on the same. You know, even when there's some really, massive protests in France, you would be hearing about a very minor protest in Moscow or something. You know, that's what everybody would be watching. Not, even when it was only 5% the size of the protest in France. Yeah, that's an old story, but like we're saying, it's just it's being used in a real sledgehammer-like fashion now. All the subtlety is gone.
Yeah, but I feel like this propaganda it's becoming too obvious. It's not working on us, but the question is, does that matter? Does it matter if it doesn't work on us? It may not.
Yeah.
Trump is in his bubble, and that's all that matters is what Trump thinks. So
Right.
It's a little scary.
Yeah, certainly when it comes to a brief air operation, it doesn't matter. He can do it. He can get it, and if he succeeds, and no plane is shot down, he can proclaim victory and maybe get even a little boost. I don't think he's going to get much of a boost from these things. He'll have his cheering section will cheer loudly for a while. But most people, again, in this country are not focused on this. Like nobody even hardly, was thinking about Venezuela before he created it as an issue. And I really don't think, outside of the Zionist community, which is significant in this country, but it's still a minority of, real committed Zionists, that people really care about Iran. They care about their own country. And if he keeps on doing this could actually even hurt him in the long run. The Democrats can say that this is a president that's just obsessed with foreign matters, and he's not taking care of this country. And I think, I think in the end, it's not going to help him. It might not hurt him in the very short run. Again, if he succeeds with some sort of brief air operation, but there's always a risk with Iran that it could turn into something much bigger. And then it really will hurt him, if he becomes entangled, if there are strikes on military bases, if the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, anything like that, or significant damage to Israel. And, and then we're all in real trouble. And there's always that risk.
Yeah, to me, it feels like if something's going to happen, it needs to happen soon, because there was a lot that went into this propaganda campaign over the weekend. And I feel like they can't do that again. It's the same thing with Operation Rising Lion. This seems to be their second Operation Rising Lion, but it wasn't as successful. And I think every subsequent one will be less and less effective because the Iranians are aware and the citizens are aware. And, I saw a report this morning that I think the foreign minister, Arachi, says that they have evidence of U.S. and Israeli involvement, documents proving that they were behind a large part of this. And they also said that we may strike first. That is something that was new, that they won't sit around and wait, right?
Yeah, well, it's not, they say they're going to, they
reserve the
have
right
to reserve the right to exercise that option. But they're not saying that they definitely will,
right.
But it just anyway shows that I think they learned something from that strike last June. This is not going to happen again. If it does, that's just shocking incompetence on the part of the Iranians. Yeah, I think, but clearly, I think, as far as I can tell, they really have learned from that, and it's not going to happen again. So this is another thing to think about. Clearly there is a push for war. We've seen it. Not just these protests and the accompanying, media campaign, but there was the drumbeat began earlier, and we talked about that a few weeks ago. But it doesn't mean that there still are, let's say, obstacles to war. There are these subjective obstacles, and one is that I think probably the biggest one is the lack of interceptors in the West, including Israel. And I think that was the main reason that the Israel and the U.S. actually just requested a ceasefire and ended that that 12-day war. It's the reason that it was a 12-day war and not a longer war. Now, did they build up those stockpiles? It's hard to believe that they have. We just have very limited production capacity, both in Israel and in the U.S. when it comes to interceptors. So are they really prepared to do this? Who knows? But it seems like it's very reckless. And again, I don't think they can pull off something like Operation Rising Lion, where they can do some significant damage within the country at the start of the war. I don't think, it took a couple of days for Iran to recover and to begin to respond. I think this time it's going to be different, and I think they know it's going to be different. So again, there are some reports that the Pentagon is resisting, this idea, and they have in the past, but they can be overcome. If Trump just orders it, it'll happen. And if, again, you see these appeals to his ego, he may just ignore the advice of all his generals and say, you're going to do it. And again, that he's developed his faith in his own judgment, partly as a result of the Operation Absolute Resolve in Venezuela. That's again a string of successes, so-called. Can create a sense of invincibility or infallibility on the part of a leader, and that's a very, very dangerous situation. So, he may just ignore their advice and their warnings and go ahead with it, and then we'll see. Maybe he'll get lucky again. Maybe, but especially in the case of Iran, Iran is a much stronger country than Venezuela, with a much, much more formidable military than Venezuela. So it would be a very, very risky operation.
It just feels like this is inevitable with Iran, because the powers that be just want this war so badly. The Zionists, it's really the Zionists that want this war, right? I mean,
above all, there are people that have just a particular hatred of Iran that is, it's hard to separate the two in this case, because for obvious reasons. But yeah, it is the Zionists. I think openly, Israel has been the one that's been pushing, and for the longest time has been pressuring the U.S. government again and again to do it. And the U.S. government always refused. Sometimes they would come close. We'd hear reports that the administration, whichever administration it might have been, is considering attacks on Iran, but then a decision would be made not to. And I think, as I recall, even at the end of the Biden administration, they were considering, but they didn't. But Trump did it, right? Yeah. And so I think, anyway, the fact that he did it means, again, that just incentivizes the Zionists to push even harder. Now we've got this guy, he's, we understand how he works, how to push his buttons. We can get him to do it again.
Yeah. I think one of the things about this massive propaganda campaign, at least to me, is that it exposed the amount of people that have been captured by the Zionists in some way. All these influencers, people that I didn't really think about. I saw like Lex Friedman tweeting about it. It was Eric Weinstein, the one that was tweeting about it, not Brett Weinstein. Sorry, Brett. But
okay,
But even like Andrew Yang, you remember Andrew Yang? He's tweeting about like, can't wait to free Iran. This type of stuff's like, wait a second. They got to you too. They got to everybody. It just showed to me, it's showing the extent. Like, why are you tweeting about this when there's active protests happening in our own country? My buddy just sent me a video from Denver of the protests, just like, why aren't we talking about this? Why are everyone's like, oh, hey, thank God we're bringing freedom to Iran. It's like, well, hey, we got some issues here. Let's talk about America. It's for these politicians, all these pundits. It shows it's scary, actually. It's scary to see how far that reach has gone, how everybody's on the payroll in some way, and they're told to send out these tweets. Yeah. It's not organic.
Well, I wouldn't say that they're actually on the payroll. In some cases, I'm sure it's true, especially some of these influencers. We heard about the $7,000 payments and whatever. Yeah, there are some people that are on the payroll, but a lot of them are convinced Zionists. It's a result of not just, somebody telling them what to do right now, but they have come to believe in this as a result of, you can say, propaganda or,
Yeah.
efforts over the course of years and decades. It's something that they've come to actually believe in. So you don't have to go and tell them to do it. They will. They are believers. They're part of your team, willingly a part of your team.
Yeah, but I think they're being told. I mean, obviously how coordinated it is. I think there's something with this.
Or sometimes it's just, you see this too, and it just, it's throughout the West. Seems to be this hive mind. There's somebody, especially a lead newspaper or media outlet like the New York Times will come up with a certain phrasing, and then within 24 hours, everybody's repeating it, and they've learned to say, oh yeah, this is our slogan. It's just sort of like somebody passed out certain signs that you're supposed to hold up at a protest. It's the same thing. Oh, this is our slogan. They know it. Nobody has to call out that person individually, but it's just sort of, yeah, okay, this is what we're using, and so everybody repeats it to show they're all part of the same team.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think we can avoid war? It just feels like this is going to happen at some point. And I don't know.
We could. Again, there are these subjective constraints here, right? There are real obstacles. There are real difficulties. The people in the Pentagon, are aware of them, and so I'm sure there's some pushback. But again, you can see they're up against a lot. Those people, those realists or semi-realists within the Pentagon, and maybe some of them exist in the State Department too. I don't know. So there is a chance that it won't go anywhere. There's nothing inevitable about this, but as we've been discussing, the pressure to do it is there, and you have somebody in the White House that doesn't seem to really respect, or he does show some awareness sometimes of objective constraints. Maybe another person is coming and say, yeah, wait a second, you think about this, Mr. Trump, or President Trump, I'm sure they would address him that way. Think about this again. Let's stop and consider this. If you do this, the Strait of Hormuz could be shut down, and then gas prices will shoot through the roof. And wait a second, that's just not going to help you. That's going to be really bad. Let's think this through. Remember why we actually ended that 12-day war so quickly. Hey, none of those problems have gone away, and maybe he'll remember that. I mean, he has shown an awareness of some, of certain realities. But if somebody can convince it, we have this great plan, you'll go in and you'll take out these things and you'll be a hero, and they won't even have time to respond. And he may go for that. And possibly he'll succeed. But again, with the case of Iran, there's really no guarantee, and they could retaliate in very heavy fashion. So, I'm sure there's some sort of battle going on behind the scenes right now. And I don't know how it's going to turn out. I think, like you say, there's a very, very high risk that we'll see an attack in the near or medium term.
Yeah, well, maybe something that he'll do is he'll have a little warm up by taking Greenland or Cuba first. It sounds so crazy about taking Greenland, but it does seem like he's really serious about it. And the Europeans, I think, are starting to realize, like, we shouldn't be worried about an invasion from Russia. We should be worried about an invasion from the United States.
Right.
Let me play the clip of Trump talking about Greenland real quick, and then we'll go.
If we don't take Greenland, Russia or China will. And I'm not letting that happen. If we don't take Greenland, Russia or China will take Greenland, and I am not going to let that happen.
Is there any deal they can offer you? Either
Sure. I'd love to make a deal with them. It's easier. But one way or the other, we're going to have Greenland.
We're going to have it one way or the other. Because apparently Russia and China are about ready to take Greenland. I mean, I don't know if the people in Greenland are aware of that. They think like...
Yeah, right. Or the Danes, or nobody else needs to be aware of that. Yeah, no, that's completely absurd. It's completely absurd. Looking at Greenland, actually, it would be the easiest in one sense, right? There's only, 57,000 people who live there, if even that. And they're not armed. He jokes about it. They have 2 dog sleds, and it's probably not much of an exaggeration. So he could take it. And he could even, because there's so few people and they're not very wealthy, there's a chance he can just buy them off too. You give each one of them $100,000. That's not even $6 billion. It's chump change to the U.S. And they could agree to become your citizens. That's a possibility. Okay.
Be nice if they gave us some money.
Yeah. So anyway, this is something that he definitely could achieve, and there's just nothing that the Europeans or the Greenlanders themselves could do to prevent it. I think that's true. On the other hand, there's just, like with the other attacks, you could see some argument, for doing it, at some sort of geopolitical interest at stake. Like in the case of Venezuela, you can say, well, it was a message, this was a country that was, openly, the government of which was openly condemning the Zionists. It was allying itself with China and Russia, was poised to become a member of BRICS. And we just knocked them flat on their, back here. And everybody sees in Latin America, this is it's a message to them, don't even think about it. And, that may not succeed, but it possibly, then it just may. Anyway, you can at least make this argument, right, that this is there's some sort of perceived geopolitical interest. I don't agree with that argument, but you can make the argument. In the case of Greenland, there's just no reason. We already have a military base there. It's already part of NATO. There's no reason why we have to take it over. There's no chance that Russia or China are going to try to take it. That's all absurd. The whole thing is just so ridiculous. And in the end, there are going to be obvious costs, diplomatic costs, especially in our relations with Europe. And it's going to put NATO under huge strains. So it's an easy one, but it's probably, makes even less sense than some of the other operations that he's considering.
Well, maybe Trump is playing 54D chess, and this is his way to end the Ukraine war by moving into Greenland and having NATO be dissolved through this action. Yeah. Do you think that NATO would fall apart from this?
I don't think so. I'm just looking at the Europeans. They're already, a lot of them are saying, some of them are saying, we got to be tough here. We got to send troops over there. That's not going to happen. I don't see them doing that. But others are already saying, oh man, he's serious. We really, we don't have any cards to play here. Let's just make a deal. And I think that's what's going to happen. They'll just roll over. If he takes it, it will put the alliance under strain. It will create anger, but with this current, the current leadership of Europe is not going to resist it. They will express some dissatisfaction. They'll make some mealy-mouthed statements. Again, that will amount to nothing. And NATO will still be there. But I would say that NATO will be weakened as a result of this, because it is, it obviously is something that strikes at the heart of it. And people, even if the leadership doesn't see it or won't admit it or won't act on that fact, there have to be others within Europe, including the opposition parties that are looking at this and saying, this is wrong. We have to do something different. These guys that have actually have appeased the bully in this case and have, accepted this outright, theft of European territory. These people have to go. We have to do something different. But that may not work out itself immediately. It may take years before we see the consequences.
Yeah. What I'm afraid is that the argument Trump might make is like, you're so worried about Russia. You're in this war with Russia. Well, and if you want us to help out, we need Greenland. Greenland is going to be our big base of our operations in some type of larger war with Russia. And then that just starts to put us a little bit more closer to this horrifying potential conflict, or direct conflict between the United States and Russia. I wonder if that's how they will, that the Europeans will make it palatable for themselves to say, okay, well, we're in an existential battle right now, because that's the way they feel. Mm-hmm. They believe they're in war with Russia, and war with Russia is coming. We need the United States on our side. having the United States and Greenland to help us with this, that'd be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, even if you're right. Well, but even if they are very upset, and I think they will be upset about the U.S. simply taking Greenland, they will be greatly angered, alarmed, and all that. Yeah, they still are not going to abandon their crusade against Russia, and that will prove to be decisive. They'll stop and think and say, well, wait a second, we know we can't do this on our own. We need the U.S. We can't have any real rift with the U.S. right now. We're just going to have to shut up and put up and even talk nice to Trump because we want him to send us arms.
Right. Yeah, no, I think this kidnapping of Maduro was a very dangerous moment because it has started something, I think, in Trump, this megalomania. Shortly after that, all of a sudden he's talking about, Colombia. He mentioned bombing Mexico. He's talking about taking Greenland. He's talking about taking Cuba, talking about bombing Iran. It's coming in hot. And if he has another success, like he does Greenland, I think this will start to fuel this even further. He will start to make the world in his own mind, how he wants it to be. And he does feel like he has that right. It almost feels like he feels like it was his destiny, and I think that's what's happening. And so that's scary. So if he takes Greenland, I think we can see him to continue on down this megalomaniac path. Do you think so? Or?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid you're right. I mean, listen to the guy. I mean, he's, the megalomania is not some label that we're attaching to him. He's just like you couldn't find a better example of it in a human being. I just listen to everything he's done. It's been the first time it's ever been done in history. Or it's the greatest in history, or the greatest, since World War II, or the largest since World. It's all that. He really has the sense that, okay, they're probably going to have to just completely, I don't know, just remove all the faces from Mount Rushmore and replace it with one big face of Trump.
Yeah,
I think that's the way he's thinking.
Well, Dad, we haven't even hit one full year of his presidency. There's no way we're making it through all three, are we? Without some catastrophic war. I mean, think about how this year has started. It's only 12 days into the new year.
Right.
We're talking about
taking. The thing is, I guess this is all I can say. Okay, I'm worried about the megalomania. But maybe there's a corner of his brain that understands there's certain places he can't go. Again, he is, for example, Venezuela is a weak country. One thing that I was reading, it's not clear. We've talked about, and I tend to believe the theory that there was a stand-down order. Now, one thing is that Max Blumenthal doesn't believe there was, and I think you have to listen to him because he, actually knows Venezuela very well. He's been there on several occasions, had long interviews with leaders, including the current, acting president of Venezuela. And so he knows the place, and he just doesn't believe that could have happened, and that it was a combination of successful electronic warfare and maybe other military strikes on the air defense system, and just confusion and incompetence. And this morning that I was reading that we knew that they had S-300s, which is, again, it's an older system that the Russians provide, but it's also a very effective one. And apparently they weren't even hooked up. And that was a result of it. Even though they knew there was this threat, they just didn't get their act together. So anyway, I'm just saying that this is a weak country, and I'm sure it has strengths in other aspects, but it has a very weak military and apparently an incompetent military, at least when it comes to these, big ticket items or whatever. Now, I think their guerrilla bands, if it ever comes to that, will probably be very, very effective. And it would be very stupid for us to go in there on the ground. But this was a weak country. And I think, we've already theorized that's really why he went after Venezuela. He was having frustrations dealing with Russia and China. You just can't push them around, but you can push around these other countries. You can have your way. And then even more so Greenland. And maybe that's what's going to happen. Now, Iran is sort of an in-between case. It's not a Russia. It's not a China. but it can hit back. And so that's the dangerous one. I think that he has enough sense. Actually, he has pulled back all in all, with many exceptions, but all in all, he has pulled back from Russia. He launched that economic war against China, but then he called it off. I mean, that shows that there is at least some sort of, island of realism within his mind. And we hope that it stays narrow. Now, again, Iran is that in-between case, which makes it a dangerous one, where there miscalculations could occur. You can see it's much weaker than Russia or China, but it's much stronger than Venezuela. And he may decide that it's weak. There'll be people telling him that that's true, and that he can do another kind of Venezuela kind of operation. And then much to his chagrin, it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah, no, I am very worried about Iran because I think the next time the U.S. strikes, Iran is done. There won't be this ceasefire symbolic bombing of a U.S. base that's forewarned. I think that this is going to be it. And then, when American soldiers get killed, then what happens here in the United States? That's the big question. It's just like, do people just automatically rally around the flag and say, let's go, take them out,
Yeah.
Or will they be rational and say like, wait, why were our boys there in the first place? Why are we trying to overthrow this government? Why are we at war with Iran? I mean, Iranians aren't a big part of our life here in the United States. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, right. It is a very dangerous situation. I guess I would put, the two, I think, real areas of concern, areas for potential major conflict or even catastrophe are Iran and the tanker war. I think just this morning I was reading that the UK was had discovered some kind of legal justification for seizing so-called shadow tankers. Say, oh my,
Do you see this all leading to a large war? I mean, we have the military budget increase talks, all this bravado.
Well, no, there's a potential for it. It's just like, again, we may get lucky. A lot of these wars, like you never know, maybe an air operation against a bombing of Iran, if it was quick and well executed, maybe it would succeed. But it's sort of like every time you do that, it's like walking into a minefield. And maybe you pull it off and you get out and you don't step on a mine. But one of these days you're going to step on a mine, which is other words to say that the conflict is going to really explode and it's going to be something that you can't contain, and then we're all in trouble. So, yeah, that's the reason why each time you have a successful operation, it's like, well, he went into the minefield and he came back and he's all right. He said, let's just send somebody, let's go to this mine. It's eventually a mine's going to explode if you keep on doing that. You may get lucky, you have a lucky streak, but eventually you're going to step on a mine.
Yeah, I think we'll step on a mine. Maybe you're right. Maybe he has a little bit of realism in the back of his mind, but I think that just means he'll probably start with Cuba and Greenland. And then when he has successes there, it'll just, any idea that caution will be gone at that point. It's like, all right, yeah. I mean, just think about the ego boost I think Trump is having, the idea that he was able to kidnap a president. That's an insane thing to do. And I think that just kind of made him just feel like, what, I can just, and there was even that talk about like, it's like, would you kidnap Putin? And he's like, oh, well, I don't need to do that. But like, as if he could, that was kind of almost the air that he had. Like, yeah, we're so powerful. I could just, I kidnap Xi Jinping, I could kidnap Putin. Like it's insanity. So we'll see. I mean, do you think about his rhetoric on Cuba? Do you think that's real as well? Do you want me to play you a clip?
It's too early. Okay, sure. Because I've just seen some headlines. I haven't looked very closely at that.
All right,
so we
let
can
me play you one about it.
Right.
Cuba is ready to fall.
Yes.
Cuba looks like it's ready to fall. I don't know if they're going to hold out. But Cuba now has no income. They got all of their income from Venezuela, from the Venezuelan oil. They're not getting any of it. And Cuba literally is ready to fall. And you have a lot of great Cuban Americans that are going to be very happy about this.
Are you considering U.S. action in Cuba?
We're not. I think it's just going to fall. I don't think we need any action. It looks like it's going down. It's going down for the count. You ever watch a fight?
now?
They go down for the count. And Cuba looks like it's going down.
Okay. Yeah, just Lindsey Graham there.
Yeah, so he's
he looked
giddy.
like he was,
He's giddy.
Yeah, I know. It's just like a, oh my.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, well, there he wasn't threatening military
That's true,
action.
that's
He
true.
just felt it was going to fall. You know, the thing is, it's like they can buy their oil from Russia or from other places. But then there's this whole other issue, the tanker war. Are they going to try to seize Russian tankers delivering oil to Cuba? And then are the Russians going to allow that to happen? That's the dangerous part of it. You know, that's.
So where do you see this going, Dad? Can you tell? Can you look into your crystal ball a little bit and just tell me? Do you think that? Are we looking at? Are we looking at a potential world war? I mean, that just sounds insane to say, but I think. Should we prepare as citizens? And if there is a major war, what does that mean for us? What happens? Are we going to have trouble buying groceries? I mean, are we going to be looking at conscription?
Again, it's just like, right. Again, if it's a world war, it could very easily involve China. And if it involves China, then we have real problems because so many of our goods, that we have come to expect and enjoy actually come from China. So, you could have empty shelves as far as that go. But then the real danger, of course, is that when you talk about a conflict between superpowers is that it could go nuclear. And that's, it's not inevitable. Sometimes people talk like it's inevitable. It's not inevitable, but there is a real chance. Because again, both sides are armed to the teeth, and if one side gets a definite upper hand, well, it would be the Russians aren't going to be attacking the U.S., but the U.S. could be in there in Ukraine. There are people that are pushing for that, and then the Russians could see a real threat to their own existence. Now, I don't think that even if we do intervene significantly in Ukraine, that we'll be able to defeat Russia, and that Russia will be able to hold the line and push back. But then the danger is that the U.S. isn't going to accept that kind of humiliation. It's bad enough if their proxy loses. That's a kind of humiliation, right? But if they lose directly, is that something that the U.S. is going to countenance, or will they go nuclear? These are the sort of things that we're going to face if we have an actual world war. So let's just not even try to get close, please,
Yeah, I really hope so. But I just feel like things have been set in motion now that can't be undone. Like if the U.S. just kind of stopped, what would happen? I mean, it's kind of the same thing with Israel. Once you start the killing, the bloodletting, it becomes difficult to stop it. And once Trump starts, bombing more countries, invading them, takes Greenland, can we stop that? I mean, and then if you do stop, then what happens? Just like with Israel, it's like, oh, sorry, we committed to half a genocide. We're still trying to ethically cleanse, but there's a ceasefire. That's not going to work. We have kind of a limbo area right now, but it's not over. And Israel has set things in motion for their own country and our country that can't be undone now. That will eventually lead to it will lead to the end, I think, of Israel, and also here in the United States. Like, what happens if we stop? I mean, the amount of debt that we have, the anger that's around the world, or it's just.
Yeah, no. Whenever you launch a war, you don't know what you're getting into. It's just war is like fire. It's like setting fire to the prairie, and maybe your plan was just to burn these 10 acres. But then the wind picks up and it just, it starts to roar across the whole prairie. That's the way it is with wars, again and again. How many wars were supposed to be over in 2 weeks? Like our own Civil War or World War I, they're supposed to be a brief war, and they, ended up going on for years and resulting in the deaths of, of millions. So it's just, and then one of the problems now is just like with these, let's say, these various taboos have been violated. And maybe, the previous administrations were hypocritical. We knew that often they did things, they always try to cloak it in the language of human rights, but it was just raw geopolitical interest really was what was the motivation, and places like Libya and Serbia and so on and so forth. But again, it's that was hypocrisy. But hypocrisy is, there's that old saying that hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. In other words, you're still respecting, you're afraid enough of some sort of moral censure or harm to your reputation that you try to pretend that you're not doing what you're doing, and in that way you're still respecting that there are limits. But now that's just been with Trump, it's just been, and with the Netanyahu, it's been cast aside. And so we are in new territory. And then with the frequency of conflicts, it's just like as war starts to become normalized, the unthinkable starts to become thinkable. And, that's where we are. We seem to be just drifting towards the abyss here,
Yeah, well, if the United States so openly casts aside international law, then we have moved into a different realm, and there's no putting that back together again, right? Because it's all based on trust. And now that we know that it's been kind of a phony international law anyways, because we set the rules, but at least we pretended to abide by them. But now if we're just, when Trump is asked about international law, it's like, who cares about international law? That's pretty much what he says. So
right.
Then that means that the only way forward is that if he backs down, then all of a sudden the United States is in this position where it's openly stated that it doesn't believe in international law. We can't go back to that now with the damage is irreparable in that sense. So the only way forward then for Trump to have any type of legacy is to remake the world through some, massive war probably, right? I think that's...
Well,
I mean, how else?
Yeah,
because what else can he do? Like I said, what happens if we stop now? We've already destroyed international law. We've destroyed our public image and our soft power. We are actively engaged in hot proxy wars around the world. We kidnapped a president, and we didn't even do a regime change. We didn't even pretend that it's about the socialists, because that government's still in power. It's just naked imperialism now.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this is the best case scenario, and that is that, again, there is that realist part of Trump's brain is still there and is resisting the megalomania. He'll go for Greenland, and part of that is just pure ego. Like it's like the first president to have acquired new territory since. Who was it? I can't remember. We have to go back many, many decades. And he's just singing statues to myself, my face on my own mountain, that kind of thing. And maybe he'll be satisfied by that and understand that, okay, he can't get the same things dealing with these other adversaries. He will limit it to the Western Hemisphere. And maybe even Cuba say, hey, there's some problems here. And I'm already the greatest president of all time. Let's just hope for that. But, I'm just, maybe I'm.
Do you believe that?
As Mark Slobodka says, hope is the death of analysis. It's wishful thinking. I would say that it's within the realm of possibility. That's like the best case scenario. It's not like that couldn't happen. Maybe he'll stop, at the abyss, and maybe he'll just, again, stick with the low hanging fruit, to switch metaphors. And we can hope for, it's ugly, but it keeps us out of World War III. And maybe, in the case of Russia, he'll still, he'll stop short of providing any real security guarantees and keep, no fly zones, no boots on the ground. So far, he's resisted that. Even Biden did, right? And maybe that will stick. And if that's so, and if he can resist the temptation to become involved in a war with Iran, which I don't really have any confidence in that. But if so, we may be okay. It will be just a wild ride, but maybe we can survive these next 3 years. And then, we say that with Trump, but who knows look, Biden really wasn't any better. I mean, I was actually, when it came to Russia, which is really the scariest thing, where where it is most likely that we could see World War III begin. Biden, if anything, was worse than Trump. And then who knows what kind of Democrat will come in and this Democrat likely, instead of rolling back the things that Trump has done, he'll build on it and just use it, kind of emphasize different enemies. Now it's Russia, which is actually even really the greater danger. So, we're, in other words, I guess we're saying I don't see an end to these troubles.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we're even going to, I don't think we're going to make it to the next presidency. So I'm not even thinking about that. I mean, but you said it's within the realm of possibility that we will avoid World War III. I don't like that statement, Dad. I don't like it just being within the realm of possibility. It's just so insane to even think about and say. But when I try to be rational about it, I just feel like.
Again, I would again.
Yeah, go ahead. No. You go ahead.
Okay,
sorry.
Yeah. But I think, again, we should point to another reason to be hopeful is the man who is in charge in Russia, Vladimir Putin, who's actually very cautious, very moderate, very, very rational, who clearly does not want World War III to happen. And he has, there were many times where Russia would have been justified to escalate in a big way and actually, again, to strike targets within NATO countries. They really would have been justified to do this, in response to actions taken by the U.S., through their proxy, but clearly, done with direct U.S. involvement, strikes into pre-2014 Russia. And there have been many of them. And there have been the attacks on the attackers. Again, they would be justified. And a different president in Russia might have done it. And who knows where we would be right now. So let's just hope that Vladimir Putin is not kidnapped or assassinated or any of these things, and that he remains in good health, because he may be the one that saves us from this. It's just that he will resist the temptation to respond in kind. And his escalations will be very, very carefully calibrated, I think, like this most recent one with the Erratic.
Yeah. I just feel like the United States has too many problems. The empire is dying. It is collapsing. And Trump is somebody that doesn't want to go down as the person where the empire collapsed in. I think he feels like he has to reestablish it. And another thing that, we just talk about is just this debt. This debt is like 39 trillion and exploding. Can you even go to war when you have that much debt and you rely so heavily on China to provide you with resources to build your weapons?
Yeah. Well, it's clear that, again, you can do these one-off kind of operations. You can do that. That's really what our military is designed for. Yeah. Again, it's just for the kind of thing that you saw in Venezuela. That's what it's designed for. It's for these quick strikes into relatively weak countries. But it's not designed for a war of attrition, anything even close to it. And that's what I think, as we can see, that's what happens in today's today's military realities are just that. If you're going to launch a war, if you're actually going to go to war with Russia or China, it's going to turn into a war of attrition. And we will, after a month, I think, our stockpiles will be gone. Maybe that's actually being optimistic. And it'll be over. We can't do it. There has to be just a complete transformation of our economy, and we don't see anything like that. Just look at, like what's happening in the air war. The Russians are clearly gaining the advantage in the ground war, and that trend will continue. But it's most dramatic in the air war. It's just now that, like, these recent strikes, I think it may have been the mayor of Kiev, Klitschko, said that we just don't have air defenses now. And that's Kiev. That's the one city, that if any city is going to have good air defenses, it's going to be Kiev. But this recent strike, it was actually on the same night that the erratic, hit Western Ukraine. And it turned out it was a military production facility, and it wasn't the gas facilities. It was just the Russian Ministry of Defense just came out with that. But anyway, on that same night, there was a massive drone strike on Kiev that has plunged Kiev, or much of Kiev, into darkness. And the mayor is telling people, if you have someplace to go, leave, because, we are not going to be able to keep the lights on in the city, for any extended period of time. And again, he said it was either the mayor or another official said, we just don't have the air defense. Now, why is that? Why is it that the Russians are, again, they're striking with the Reshniks and these Garand drones, which are based on the Shahads, that the Iranians gave them like 3 years ago. But they have gone, just this drone warfare on both sides, has gone through these evolutions. Now these drones are much more advanced, have much larger warheads. You can travel, the Grand 3s have jet engines and so on and so forth. There's all kinds of improvements that have been made to them. And they're churning them out in huge numbers because they're striking with them night after night after night, and with the Iskanders and all the other, everything between the drones and the Oreshniks, they have them. And I remember back in March of 2022 reading articles about, they're about to run out of missiles, the Russians are. And look where they are. Okay, so we don't have the production capacity to produce the interceptors. That's why there aren't any interceptors. There's so few in Ukraine. But the Russians have the capacity to keep on, cranking up their production of all these various drones and missiles. And that right there, you can see it. That, because that's not Ukraine. When you're talking about kind of dueling production systems, that's not Ukraine against Russia. That's NATO against Russia. And NATO has lost that air war. And so again, if you're going to go after Russia directly, why would you think it would be any different?
Right. Yeah, it makes it scarier in a way. In one way, it makes me think that, okay, maybe we will avoid war because there's these hard constraints on our production of conventional weapons. But then the scary side is that, okay, we do something like, let's be real, the biggest threat right now for World War III or our larger war with the United States is Iran, right? If we hit Iran, Iran strikes us back, hits our bases, we are humiliated. We don't have the capacity to engage in a war of attrition halfway across the world there. We can't use our Navy because they will get sunk if they get too close in the Red Sea. Then, okay, what do we do? We'll be so embarrassed. Israel is getting destroyed. It's time for Israel to use some nuclear blackmail. Say like, hey, you gotta go in even heavier, or we're going to use a nuke, or maybe the United States will use a nuke. This is what's scary, because we, like you said, there's these weak countries like Venezuela, Cuba, that we can push them around. Iran, we pretend is weak. You saw that Fox News clip I showed in the beginning, just how Iran is at the weakest state possible. There's this belief that it is just got to kick it and then it'll fall down. It doesn't fall down. Yeah. You told the whole world, the American citizens and everybody in the West, how weak and horrible this regime is. Now they're kicking your ass. Yeah. What do you do?
The smart thing to do, again, is actually not to be involved in Iran. There are real strains within Iran, the economic and political and, generational. I think a lot of the young people, they don't have the experiences of their elders of the Iraq War and of the living under the Shah and so on. And so there are all these different social and economic strains within the country. And they're for real. I got this.
Yeah, it's been bothering me. I should have said something. This light's been.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So those are for real. But the thing, if you and there is a chance, that there could be a real change. Not necessarily a revolution, but a real change of government and a change of policy in Iran. But it has to come from within Iran. If you're going to attack Iran, you're going to probably very quickly put an end to whatever those trends are, because immediately everybody understands that their enemy is, not the government, it's not the other political party or faction or whatever. It's the enemy is Israel and the U.S. And then you'll see that Iran will come together as they did during the 12-Day War.
I think they already know. what's been coming out a bit with these protests, these videos, for example, one of the videos that was most widely circulated, it turns out that this was actually from a protest in Berlin, actually not too long ago. And it's amazing that didn't get any traction. That one didn't go wild. And then the image that has become kind of the poster child of this whole regime change operation is this woman burning a picture of Khamenei to light a cigarette. But that was taken in Ontario, Canada, a couple of 3 or 4 years ago. But that's what they're using, and it's gone everywhere. So it shows you that a lot of these videos and these signs aren't even true. It's just
right. I'm sure some of them are, but you're right. And then there's AI too. It's really hard to know what's true and what's real and what's not these days.
I did see some video clips of Iranians rallying behind, though, and some massive gatherings in support of the government. And I also saw some interviews of people that were saying, like, we know who's doing this. It's the U.S. and Israel. It's like, we may have our disagreements. I may not love the government, but this is, we know who the enemy is. So that seems to be, it makes sense to me. I don't believe the Iranians forgot what happened in June, during the 12-day war. They understand. So this idea that the propaganda was so heavy, though, it started to make me question as well. I'm like, maybe it's really happened. Maybe there really is a revolution. But then you find out a lot of these videos are fake. A lot of or they're not from Iran, or they're from a previous time. And then, it became clear to me that there's something fishy about this. It just didn't make sense. And the big question is, often the best propaganda is based on, a kernel of truth. There's something there, but then you build on it, greatly exaggerate it, and you end up taking something that maybe was true at the beginning and creating a lie out of it. And I think that's what we're seeing. Right. Okay. Well, I guess we can end it there, Dad. I just think that we're going to war. I just think it's happening now, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, all I can say is I hope you're wrong, but
if you're a betting man, what do you think?
What do you think? Let's say just war with Iran. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, war with Iran. The chance of taking Greenland. Those are the two. Those are the two big ticket items, in my opinion, on Trump's mind.
I would say with Greenland, I would put it at above 50%. I'll just say that. I can't get more exact than that. With regard to Iran, I say at least a limited air operation. I would say at least 50. I would say 50%.
Do you think a limited air operation can actually be limited? I'm
just saying that's hard. It's really, because again, it just takes, one plane is shot down and that kind of changes everything. And then, we've been humiliated and we got to go in again. And then maybe another, and then it strikes on military bases in Iraq and all that. All those things can happen. That's the big danger with Iran. Again, it was just, we talked about the possibility. We don't really know what Venezuela had. But it seems like, okay, they did have some equipment, but they didn't use it. They weren't really prepared to use it. But we know the Iranians do have the ability to retaliate, and I think there's every reason to believe that they will use it. So,
I think regardless of whether or not a plane is shot down, I think Iran will strike back if the U.S. carries out an attack. I think they've made that clear,
so.
Right?
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I hope they listen, because I'm watching the news. If you watch BBC and these other things, the narrative is that it's all bluff. They won't do it. I've been hearing they had these some Iranian scholar from Stanford on BBC saying, like, it's all bluff. They won't do it. You got to just go in and be a man and overthrow the government. Pretty much. It's nuts.
Yeah.
Okay, Dad. Well, we'll just watch and see. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
We can do.
All right. Have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.